we can move to a more affluent area, we can send our children to our most prestigious schools. None of these will protect them. The fact is that all of the children, including my child, will face these moments, big or small. They are going to have moments where they face racism. We can't prevent that. I think we should do isn't like hiding these issues from them, introducing these concepts at a very young age.
Welcome to the Take 1.5 podcast. This is your host, Min Lee.
Thank you for bringing me back. So my name is Jang Cho. I am a child and adult psychiatrist, and my work has heavily evolved around cultural identity, cultural difficulties for children of immigrants, both young children and adult children. This has been a pleasure to be on this podcast.
And thanks for joining me again. The topic that we want to discuss today is the cultural crisis identity. And that especially in the climate now that we're in with DEI and everything that's going on, especially since the COVID. Our thought going into this conversation is that we don't understand and know everything, but we want to provide us platform where we could start discussing about microaggression, internalized racism, and biases. And maybe we could start here. What is internalized racism?
A lot of us who have come from Korea, we don't necessarily have faced racism before and don't really have a lot of concept other than beyond like, oh, it's uneven treatment because of the color of your skin. Because Korea is very homogeneous society. And so when you enter America, where we are very heterogeneous and we are very, very different from each other, you don't have a concept of all of these things. So a lot of people can recognize outright frank racism, right? Like people calling someone like yellow face or those derogatory terms like chinks and things like that in the back in the day, those were racism. I think we have in the past couple of years with the COVID and anti-Asian race violence against Asians and things like that during COVID, we have kind of come to terms with learning about more internalized racism, which is more subtle. Sometimes people who do have internalized racism don't even know that they're expressing it, and they don't know that they do have these internalized thoughts, but it still is racism. And when you encounter it, it's very offensive.
So recently, I was invited to a luncheon with mostly Asian American ladies. And it was still early, so when we got to the restaurant, it was pretty empty. And so we could have picked any table that we wanted. The other ladies who was hosting the event, they pointed to the table in the very back corner and said, oh, let's go sit over there. In that moment, it reminded me of middle school in the cafeteria, right? Where we are all stuck in that back corner very quietly and just amongst ourselves talking in Korean or Chinese or whatever. I said, no.
Good job.
No. We are going to sit right in the center of this room, big table. So we did. We sat in the center, big table, enough for all of us, and we had nice luncheon. In those type of moments, it brings me back to middle school right away in the cafeteria.
Feeling different, feeling not mainstream, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
feeling not belonging there. We have to like stick
Right.
ourselves in the corner because we don't belong there. That we don't want to be seen. We don't want to be the center of attention and maybe targeted for some sort of racial remarks.
I think that's basically what you just described, internalized racism, right? I think it goes both ways, but even it's like subtle enough that you can't express it in words that are in very succinct words, but you know what it feels like, especially if you have grown up here. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of people who were born and raised here or even came here at a younger age have faced, that carries through your life. and sometimes it surfaces in different areas of your life.
I know sometimes it seems more offensive when it's internalized because, I mean, you're your own people and you're taking on that racist narrative that we were shown, taught. And sometimes when you're aware, you're thinking, don't be sold into that. But I have to admit, when I was younger, I think I did also was sold into that narrative of,
That you're not mainstream and that you need to be on the sidelines.
yeah, I don't belong here. I'm different. Not in a good way. Just
Yeah.
something's not enough. Because you're not white. You're not pretty
Uh,
enough. You're not smart enough. You're not rich enough, wealthy enough, or you're not connected enough. I mean, that was so like prevalent in every aspect, I think, growing up here in the States.
I think that's a difficult thing that at least like my colleagues and I, but also a lot of the educators and parents are trying to change, right? What you're talking about, that I don't belong here, the sense of not belonging here, comes from the fact that this internalized sense of what America is, right? Um, we talk about America being a melting pot, but in the end, a lot of people have this internalized thoughts about America is a place where white people live, right? Fundamental concept of what America is has to change in order for people to say, I was born here, I am an American, and this is what America looks like. So, this is something that I do keep very, very dearly in terms of kind of cultural identity, in that, I wasn't born here. I came here in my teens, and and my parents stayed in Korea. So for me to form my cultural identity and who I am has been really difficult. And, I think it's one of those things that goes back to this podcast name, at that 1.5 generation. I think that all of that kind of changed a lot and solidified when I actually had my daughter. Well, first of all, I met my partner, was born and raised in LA, but he went back and forth, and he's very fluent in both cultures, but he's very firm on, like, I'm an American, right? And so that was very kind of refreshing to me. And then when we had the child, it was kind of like, well, how do I want to raise my child? And even though we're ethnically Korean and I am a naturalized American and my husband is American, we are not going back to Korea. We don't plan on going back to Korea. We plan on living in America. And so by virtue of my child being born here, she is an American. And I wanted her to have developed this cultural identity of being not just Korean, but not just American, but Korean American. And to me, that was very important because having her know that Korean Americans are part of America and that we make up America and that we belong here. And so that's kind of been something that I've been very keen on, making sure that we talk about skin colors, we talk about her classmates, we talk about movies and things like that. My daughter said something very profound that shocked me. And she said, Mommy, we're Americans by law, but we're Koreans by our faces.
Oh, uh-huh.
And I was like, done, done, done. All my work just went downstream. And so we had to talk about what it means to be an American. And, I had to correct her and say, well, we have ethnically Korean faces, but we're still Americans in both by law and both by our faces.
I love how you explain to your daughter that we are Americans both by law and by our faces. That's right. Yeah, I mean, this face,
It's also part of America. Yeah.
exactly. A lot of times when you're asked, where are you from?
Yeah, complicated answer and complicated question
Mm-hmm,
they're asking, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I think some people will argue like, well, what's wrong with asking where you're from, right?
mm-hmm,
But that is the internalized bias where like, do you ask these questions frequently to white appearing Americans? Probably not.
mm-hmm,
Maybe you do ask this similar question but in a very different way, right? And so I think part of it is recognizing that and being aware, which is a burden, emotional and mental burden on us. But I think it's also something that I feel very is crucial in going forward in terms of like the next generation of my children who are going to be here.
mm-hmm,
And,
mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of like paying forward.
You know, when we're buying our first home in New Jersey, we're looking at different neighborhoods and school district and the school scores and all these things that we thought that was very, very important. The realtors informed us it's a great school district and it's mostly white people in this neighborhood. And we thought, oh, okay, whatever. But in retrospect, I almost wish that I had put my children into more diverse
Mm,
community than just white people, which I didn't realize at that time that it would cause them to question their appearances.
yes.
Why am I not blonde? Why do I not have big Singapore eyes? And all these things that really concerned them at the time. But I think I was almost unaware of that. I thought it was like, oh, this is just a phase type of thing.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because I think I'm similar with you in that my like young formative years were spent in a homogenous Korean space. So I specifically remember being shocked when I had brought all these Korean mangas, like manachek,
Oh,
romantic
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
manachek, to my school in high school, and I kept on reading them. My roommate, who was an African American girl, she was looking at it and she goes, why is it that you're reading a Korean manga and all the characters are white? No, but they're not
Oh,
white, right? So stories are all Korean. It's written by Korean, drawn by Korean author. But the what she saw was the Western features
yeah.
that they had put in, and it was like a very shocking thought because I had never thought
Hmm.
that these were white
Right.
appearing people, right? And so it's very interesting to me to see like what people think of other and what is not other. And going back to my daughter, like we're living in a very rural Washington state when she was very little. She started asking me if she can dye her hair yellow when she's
Hmm.
older because all the princesses and all her friends were their hair was blonde, and it was kind of shocking, and it like, it was like a uh-oh moment between my
Hmm.
husband and I.
Hmm.
And I had told this to my mother, who has, she still lives in Korea. Never, I mean, she's come back and forth, but she's never lived
Right.
here. I told her the story, and she thought it was the cutest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just went like above her
Hmm.
head that
Hmm.
this was something that I have to really think about. And so that's discrepancy in terms of the kind of dilemmas that we go through here in America is very different. And you are correct about the young children that come here that, their concept of things are going to be very different than the concept of what I had.
Hmm.
And it's not their job to explain that to me.
Yeah,
It is my job to learn, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. How do Asian Americans process this concept of racism and cultural identity?
They're a little bit separate in
Okay.
that, and it also really differs on, it just depends on, I think, generations of children and what age they are, what we call so-called Gen Z and even Gen Alphas, like the younger generation who
Hmm.
are in middle school and high school, or even college era. Those young people tend to be very aware, especially the second generation and on who have been here. And I think a part of that was expedited by COVID when there was
Hmm.
such anti-Asian aggression, and they had felt very vulnerable. In fact, I had a lot of Asian American young adults in their 20s and 30s come to seek therapy during that time because they felt physically unsafe. And it really shook their world in that, because all they know is America, right?
Mm.
Like they are Americans. And basically, the rug was like pulled underneath them. And it really made everything feel so dangerous. I've had young women in their 20s and 30s who couldn't walk the streets of DC and New York without help. And even like women who have interracial marriage and feeling like they needed their white husbands or African American husbands to walk with them just to work or just to the grocery store or whatever, and feeling like their autonomy has been taken, but also not belonging in a country that they're supposed to be belonged. That was at a time of very, very big crisis for a lot of those people, a lot of cultural crisis for them, and feeling unsafe.
It's just unbelievable.
It is, and I think it was like very frustrating and very devastating. I think a lot of adults who are first gen, I think it's something that's expected in certain ways,
Mm.
where cultural identity they have is that I'm Korean, or I've come here as an adult, but
Mhm.
I'm still Korean, and so they're othering themselves away,
Mhm.
and maybe that was the protecting factor for a lot of people. But kids who have grown here, who have been taught that they're Americans themselves, are feeling like, well, my country doesn't really want me, and that's been really earth-shattering for a lot of people.
This is your country. This is what you know.
Hmm.
Where do you go
Yep,
from here if you're not wanted? We're othered
exactly.
here.
Hmm.
That is so crazy. I mean, we had those type of experiences at home too. My youngest son at the time was playing video games, and I guess they play with this people who don't even know they
Sure.
come on like this
Yeah.
platform. And he was called. They asked, like, "Oh, you don't sound like Asian. Where you from?" And then he told them, "Oh, I'm Korean American." And then these group of kids told him, "Oh, you eat dogs and stuff like
Yep.
that." So
Yeah.
it's real. It's not like my kids are shelters from this. This is other people's story. That's
Yes.
the
And I think
homes.
one of the things that I want to emphasize to the parents is like exactly what you said. We can try to shelter our children. We can move to a more affluent area. We can move to New York City. We can send our children to the most liberal schools or most prestigious schools. None of these will protect them.
No.
The fact is that all of the children, including my child,
Mhm.
will face these moments, big or small. They are
Right.
gonna have these moments where they face racism
Hmm.
or bias. We can't prevent that. So what I think we should do to help them isn't like hiding these issues from them, but it's actually introducing these concepts at a very young age, at the right level of
Hmm.
understanding, but also, well, number one, recognize them, right? Sometimes people don't recognize
Hmm.
microaggression and things like that, and so you need to recognize them and then learn how to deal with them, right? Because I'm sure you have encountered, like, for example, like something benign, like, I was a fellow at a hospital and I was getting in the elevator, and this nice surgeon guy was in the elevator holding the door for me. And he goes, Ni-hao. And it's very benign, right? Like, I felt like I was very angry initially, and then I was like,
Hmm.
later I was like, I'm in my 30s, and this is like the extent of racism I've encountered in my life. I have been very lucky and sheltered,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But it is still maddening, right? So then, I'm kind of like taken back and don't know what to
Hmm.
say, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And like later on, you're like, well, man, I should have said this, or all
Hmm.
this stuff.
Right.
So instead of doing that, like you can have these conversations with your children young and talk about what are the responses you would like and how do you come into that situation and not feel like you're being taken advantage of, and
Hmm.
how do you feel, yes, it hurt, but it didn't last. The pain didn't last. We have a group of Asian American child psychiatrists. There aren't that many of us,
Hmm.
so we're a very tight, close group. And we had to have these processing groups sessions when COVID and anti-Asian racism started to happening because a lot of them, what they had encountered as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old, it came back. Like things that they forgot,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
came back and it was very triggering and it was very difficult. And so I think it's something that people carry. Even at age 3 and 5, they don't know about it, but you've carried that feeling through your life.
Yeah.
And so, how do we help our children to be able to stand up to it and not have lasting harm?
So what can we do?
Well, it depends. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of different ways, right? Like, advocating in schools, right, about teaching different cultural diversity and different, even like the concrete things like, like Asian nights or international nights or any of these things are part of that the effort.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that these are conversations that you're going to have very, very young and
Mm-hmm.
continue to have them because
Mm-hmm.
kids, even if you think that kids don't know, they are.
Yeah.
It's in there, right? And so we've started reading books about skin colors, different changes. There's a lot of like resources out nowadays about talking about other diversity in this
Mm-hmm.
world. There are books, talking about Sankapur. There's a very famous book that came out a couple of years ago about Asian eyes, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
kid's book. It's called Eyes That Kiss in the Corner, and so it talks about my eyes that don't have like lashes that are like, beautiful, but it kisses in the corner and what that
Oh.
means. And it's one word. And all of these things, I'm not doing anything heroic. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
reading books with my children. It comes out like we sent her to a kindergarten that was very, very, very non-diverse because we were in a rural area, and kids would ask about eyes and stuff like that. And it's innocent, but still they had never seen it. And my daughter is
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, my eyes kiss in the corners,"
That's
right?
great.
And so giving them words,
Mm-hmm.
right? Giving them words to talk about it, giving them pride in what they look like. I think these are the kind of things that are like just built on each year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's more important.
Can we talk about what's happening these days with DEI and all these very tough topics? What do you see?
I, well, this is more of my opinion too,
Mm-hmm.
but I think, well, I'm on the opinion that DI is very, very important,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also, the reason that DI is important is because the basis, it's based on the thought, well, I think it's a fact, but thought that world is not a fair place. Because in an ideal world, if the world was fair place, then yes, like, yeah, merit is important. And that's what you're going to depend, whatever the thing is, like the most important thing is merit and that's how you're going to get ahead in life and do better in life. But DI came because that's not how it works, right? It's not how it works because women didn't get to go to school. Women, or back in the day, this is going really backwards, but like Asian Americans were not able to own lands,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and so these are things, even if I did well as everybody else, I couldn't get in to things, right? And so that DI is important because that DI is what makes those things not happen. These are measures to help people who are not majority, and to make things a little bit more even. I think a lot of people think of DEI as people who want to get ahead of things. No, it's about getting equal opportunity, regardless of your sex, your race, or certain disabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think that's getting lost. What I see, and what I have experienced myself, but also some of my patients, is the group of people who get ahead right? Like people, like, so yes, Asian Americans, a lot of them do go to great schools. They do great in the measurements and achievement. But how many people are actually in the C-suite level in the world? How many
Mm-hmm.
people are actually movers and shakers in this country? Yes, we're a minority, but does that minority percentage actually translate? No. And why do you think that is, right? And so these are like what we call, glass ceilings and bamboo ceilings and things that we don't know. And even the ones that got in there, I mean, they've had to be like above and beyond of many people, and they face these microaggressions in a very real way every day in and out of their work. And I've seen people burn out. I've seen people get very frustrated, but also like going against the system,
Yeah.
right? And and I think DI is something that is in the works in the very bottom level, but reaches up there. And I think what we're seeing is that it's getting dismantled from the a very concrete way. So I do worry that, like, it doesn't make a difference. I'm not going to school. I'm a private practice psychiatrist. I have my professional certificate. Maybe the extent of like what I would face is like some patients who don't want me as their doctors because I'm
Mm-hmm.
Asian, things like that. Um, but what about my daughter? Like, what if she wanted to be in the Congress? What if she wanted to be like leaders in a corporate setting? Um, what if she wanted to be actress? Is that something that she's going to go against the hard rock and just not going to be able to face because of DI is gone and these are not measurements that are supported?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think it's so important for us to realize that for us and for the next generation. So I almost want to talk to our first generation parents. They are not aware that we have to deal with these things daily.
Yeah.
So therefore, not able to support or empathize with this. It's like frustrating.
It is frustrating, but I think and I've been in that position too, where it's
Mm,
very frustrating. But I think what I'm recognizing also is that they've done their dues, right?
mm,
They came here to survive. Their concept of thriving in America might be different from concept of thriving for a second generation. And that's okay because I think each generation does something a little better
mm.
because of the foundation that the former generation put on, right? So the kind of difficulties and dilemmas that different generations face are going to be different because we're moving forward in different ways. So yes, it would be great if our first generation parents can do that. Um, and I've seen many younger moms, first gen immigrant moms who are parents who do recognize these things, recognize that they have to learn about these things for young children. But I think for people who have come here in their 40s and 50s and they have survived, I think these are really hard concept and sometimes like a luxury to think about
Uh-huh.
these things, right?
See.
Yeah, like if I'm focusing on like putting food on my children's table every day, these are not
Mm,
something that I can afford to think about. As the children of immigrants, I think I'm not saying it didn't hurt you, but I think it's also something that you have to recognize there are limits of what parents can do for you. And I think for me, as a 1.5 generation who can kind of come in and go, my job focuses on building network of people like us who have experienced these things and able to impart wisdom to younger generation that might not be my child, but like someone who's in teen, whose parents couldn't do it,
mhm.
so that we have these network of kind of mentoring, right? In a way that, yes, I've gone through it, and these are things that I felt, but these are things that work for me. And I think those are the kind of things that would help. And I think that's why the community is very important, right? Even if it's through church or other organizations or like, community centers in the
Yeah.
area, I think finding these web of people who can young children or young adults through these difficulties. I think that's something that we have to focus on. I wish I knew that I would have faced these bamboo ceilings and
Hmm.
glass ceilings, or interaction with non-Koreans, and how to do social interactions that might move me through these difficult
Yeah.
situations. My parents can't do that,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's not that they won't, they can't.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to find someone who's going to be able to teach you, like imparting the wisdom that we've done. I think those are the kind of things that are very important.
It's a good point. Yeah, the
Hmm.
community.
Hmm. I think that's why, for me, it's important to have a sense of like Korean Americans, right? Like, because I think when we talk about Korean Americans, there's a lot of these separations in terms of like, oh, are you Korean, or are you Korean American, or are you like Americanized Korean, and all these things. But we're all put into the same pot in terms of the experiences that we're going to have. And so having solidarity is more important, and having a voice in in the society, you have to have solidarity. I think these are the kind of things that got a little bit voiced up during COVID, through it, when things were really hard. These are the things that needs to be continued despite what the government wants, right? And so that we can have our voice and power.
So important. So important. And I'm very encouraged to see more and more
Hmm.
voices rising. So when I was growing up in New York City in 1980s, and we're not talking about like Wisconsin somewhere either, right? New York City, Queens, the Korean kids would congregate after school and walk to the subway together to go home. But there would always be kids, boys especially, following us from behind and going ching chong chang, and with the slanted
Oh,
eyes and
yeah.
things like this. And we just, kept quiet. We just went our way because one not knowing what to say and how do you fight these things. Another episode that I had, this was in middle school. I was always that quiet kid. And then this kid from behind would kick my chair, right? And I said, stop a couple of times. And he said, oh, go back to your country. So I, being that quiet girl, that Asian girl, I stood up, I slapped him in the face.
Wow.
I know, I don't know where that came from, but the teachers saw me and they didn't do anything about it because,
Mm.
I'm the nice, quiet girl. I'm not sure if the children these days experience such explicit racism.
Yes. So I have a colleague who is
Mm,
not, she's an Asian American.
mm,
And a couple of years ago, her child was in elementary school. And the boys in her class said, "You're Chinese. You need to go back. You brought COVID." Now, the difference
mm.
is that she came home, was able to tell her mother, and the mother was able to contact the school, and school react. And this is in Brooklyn, New York.
Mm.
Um, um, but the school actually responded appropriately. They were able to do like school-wide education on why this is not appropriate. The child was able to get apology from the boys. Now, when she came home to talk about this with mom, mom asked, "Do you want to talk to the teachers about this, or do you want me to talk to your teachers, or do you want to do it together?" And she chose to do it together. And so that's also really important to me. So going back to like, these things are going to happen, right? It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop, right? But what's different is what's being done afterward. Trauma, I think of these things as a trauma, right?
Right.
Traumatic events in your
Yes.
life. Processing a trauma isn't about not getting into the situation that you were in. It's actually being in a similar situation and coming out with a very different outcome. So if you think about it that way, it was very triggering for the mother who grew up in the city too and had those moments, but it was very empowering for both mom and the child to have this different outcome where school responded appropriately. It was very empowering for both of them, right? And so now she is modeled, like, right? Like, if this happens to me again, these are the things that I'm going to do, and I can get help.
Yeah, you're so right. The outcome can be so different. And that feeling of empowerment because of the outcome, how we deal with that is so important. So as 1.5 generation parents or first generation even, I know we need to stop thinking about it as, am I being too sensitive? Am I being petty?
Very similar to the boundary that we talked about. If you feel annoyed by it, it has been violated.
I know, once again, I learned so much from you today.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing me on.
I mean, there are, of course, deeper layers and many other layers to talk about, but I think it's a good start. And hopefully, many of our listeners have their own conversation at home and among their friends about this very topic.
One of my colleagues published a book on
Oh,
boundaries in Korean, Kim 박사님, and she is a psychologist at Columbia.
that's
Yeah,
great. Yeah, more and more people voicing.
right.
Please support us by liking, following, and commenting and sharing this episode with your friends so that our community can discuss, and this could be a very active conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.